Well, thanks everybody, and nice to be here. Good evening to you all. Some familiar faces, a lot of familiar faces here. Landscape architecture, architects and urban designers I have treated with over the years, created buildings with a number of you, and some great buildings we've collaborated on, some great spaces we've collaborated on. Hey, thanks for the invitation to speak tonight. Past the intro, yes, I chair the Planning Committee. We've got three major committees at Auckland Council, and along with Environment Community and the Finance Committee. And as Bill outlined, the Planning Committee is responsible for that, the spatial planning of Auckland, all the land use planning, the Unitary Plan. The spatial planning is the Auckland Plan. It is an immense task. I've got really indirect responsibility for three CCOs, Auckland Transport, Panuku, that's our development agency, and Watercare. Probably my big focus is on the first two, transport and the urban regeneration that Watercare, that Panuku was undertaking. So tonight I'd like to speak to you on the subject, of course, and focusing on some lessons that we've learned in recent time that have come out of our work through the Urban Design Panel. So the medium density development that you've been discussing and I'm discussing here tonight is a critical part of delivering on a vastly improved Auckland, an Auckland that doesn't continue to show its girth. And the shift towards that consolidated form of housing, it's necessary, but it actually provides us with an immense opportunity to shine as practitioners and deliver models of living that have not previously been anticipated here in Auckland. And yep, it's all about quality homes, but it's more than that. It's about quality communities. Homes, people that then knit into communities. And you cannot ignore the importance of the unfolding of a community. We're not just building homes in Auckland as our focus. And it is, of course, as you well know, it's absolutely imperative that we get the design right. Now we'll navigate some slides here. This is how we have been growing, and some of you have probably seen these numbers before. Intensification is absolutely necessary when you look at stats like this. That car number actually, out of interest, has dropped dramatically. We are not putting that number of cars on the roads anymore. In fact, the ships coming into Auckland are not disgorging cars at anywhere near that number. A few of those have moved around, but generally, get the message, the pressure is on. We have a wonderful attractiveness problem. We live in a beautiful place, a city that is gripped by two oceans, punctured by three harbours, and then further punctured by 40-odd volcanic maunga. Tell that to your friends overseas, and that's why they come here, plus other things. It is a very attractive place. But as a city, we're not that productive. We generate 37% of the nation's GDP. Most international cities would be punching well above that, and we should be punching well above that. In my view, we're failing in that regard. We're not contributing to the health, not just the financial well-being of the nation, but all the well-beings of the nation. A city like ours should be contributing, not taking from the nation. I'm not suggesting that we're absolutely taking, but cities of the future, international cities like ours, will be providing the subsidies to other parts of the nation. And for me, that's an important point to note going forward. In recent years, or last year, we had about 2.75 million visitors coming into Auckland. That's another pressure. And of course, we all know we're super diverse, 200 ethnicities living in this place. And that makes a tremendous richness. We're about 1.7 million people at the moment. And since 91, we've been adding about, I think we've added about 675,000 since then. And you can see 825 a week, and we need to provide for at least another million in the next 30 years. And some recent feeds coming out of Stats New Zealand suggest that we'll be passing the 2 million mark in 2028. That's just 9 years away. So we're experiencing unprecedented growth, and with that, we need to provide capacity, some 400,000 dwellings for those many people, and then we've got to provide the jobs, some 280,000 jobs to go with for those people over the next 3 decades. So it's quite a significant challenge. How do you do it? Well, I don't want to bore you with plans, but you need one of these. You really need to look out before you can look short. And fortunately, the statute that sets Auckland up requires us, and we're the only place in New Zealand that actually has to look long. So the Auckland Plan 2050, we had one in 2012, and last year we confirmed it after a couple of years' work. It's been much of my focus in the first 2 years. We've landed an updated and probably slightly revolutionised the way this plan is written. So this sets out the high-level strategic direction, the vision, as I mentioned, for the future of Auckland looking out 30 years. It outlines all the 4 well-beings as you know them, the social, the cultural, really important in Auckland, and the economic, and increasingly important, the environmental goals and outcomes. It guides the unfolding of our city, something will be familiar to you in your practices. And it includes a development strategy that maps out quite a bit more specifically of where that growth will occur, and then that is in sync with infrastructure planning. And then we've got infrastructure documents that sit just alongside that development strategy. So if you can picture it this way, it has a city centre at its core, and then it's supported by key nodes, and the key nodes are Westgate up north, Manukau to the south, Albany back to the north, and further north Warkworth as a satellite, and another satellite, Pukekohe, and then supported, underpinning that, we've got a number of other metro centres, town centres, neighbourhood centres, and then coastal centres as well. Not taking too much growth or population density or even job density in those latter centres. So we're the only city in New Zealand that's required to have a 30-year vision, and I think it's a real bonus, and it really sets us up. So the way this plan now is read is not like the 2012 plan. The 2012 plan was a big, thick document, and it was a print document only. It wasn't dynamic. It took 6 years to update. Now it's a plan that if say the census data comes in, we've got new information, we can update the plan. We can just do it. It's a digital plan now. And it's also designed in such a way that if you're in the transport body, you don't just go and read the transport section. You read the plan. It's interwoven. Transport relates to the urban form, to the urban regeneration, to the environmental outcomes, to the Māori well-being. These aren't isolated chapters that you can pick off and just say as a practitioner, for example, or a technical officer at council, I only have to read this part. No more. We expect all our staff to be reading right across the plan and understand it in its totality so that we get holistic outcomes. So it's about having that deeper knowledge. And there you can see the directions, key directions. I won't read them, I'll let you read them, in the plan, and that's all about the bones of how we set the city up. And so to do this, we need to enhance the sort of interaction and the social cohesion within our communities, but we also need to address the productivity, which is what I've just referred to, in having our GDP of just 37% when we've got a population cut of around, or share of around about 33-34% maybe at the moment. We should be up there in terms of productivity, if you want to measure by GDP, and I admit there's a lot of other measures you need to address than just the Treasury's GDP. But that, for our cities, we should be punching well north of 40% plus contribution to the nation's GDP. I would add too that this plan brings a whole new focus on environmental outcomes, cultural outcomes, Māori outcomes, which I've just mentioned, and overall sustainability. It brings a greater awareness to climate change breathing down our necks, and the enormous challenge that we have in future, climate proofing our city. And that's top of mind for me, and we'll hear more about that in our climate action plan in the next month at Council. I'm going to go down into one of those sections. So see that one up in your top right? Homes and places. Now I'm almost doing what I just said we shouldn't be doing, but just for time's sake, I'm just taking you down into one of those sections. And here's the homes and places section. And there are the key directions there. So the key directions there, there's 4 of them. We're talking about a quality compact approach, that you're familiar with that. And that means development that occurs to create enduring, well-designed communities. Enduring communities. And you get that through designing them well. And particularly when they're in close proximity to rapid transit, earning and learning. They are the 3 things that people, the market, the real estate market at the moment is really homing in on the Unitary Plan, and some 42% of dwelling consents are being issued within 1,500 metres of the rapid transit network. We've never seen that in Auckland before, but that is the market trend. And I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but that really gets us to ask some questions whether our greenfield focus is something that we need to maybe put as much weight and budget into as we thought even a year or 2 years ago. So we need to accelerate, obviously, the construction of new homes to respond to the growth that we're experiencing, and also the changing preferences of people. As I've mentioned, the housing preferences, the living preferences are changing dramatically. And in some ways that maybe does reflect the diversity that we're experiencing in Auckland now as well. And the big focus there is we need to change the way we are also housing people. It's no longer that so-called quarter-acre paradise in the single dwelling home, that's just a car drive from a job in Ponsonby. That is not what people are turned on by anymore. And we also need to ensure that we're creating wonderful public spaces for people to enjoy as this density develops. And that needs to be inclusive, and it needs to be accessible. And then there are 4 focus areas. Dropping down from there, we have 4 focus areas: accelerating the development to improve the housing choice I've just mentioned, increasing the security of tenure, and recognising the different sorts of tenures. We've invalidated renting for decades in this city. We need to validate renting as a valid means of living in a home long term. If you look at the German model, people are investing their money in equities in their businesses, and they're renting at the age of 50, and it's entirely okay. We need to start looking at, in my view, giving real validation to those that rent a house long term, and not necessarily be predisposed with every Aucklander being able to buy a home. Get the balance right. So it's all about broadening the range of those tenure models, and improving the built quality, which we'll come to. And investing in supporting Māori is a big focus of ours, and we're just kicking off the formative stages of working up a Papakainga plan change that is in motions right now. And again, as I mentioned before, it's ultimately about creating great places for people, great places which people feel anchored to and feel a belonging to. So the Unitary Plan is I'm sure you're well versed in that by now. We reviewed all that. It's about 99% operative at the moment. That's our planning toolbox that allows us to deliver on those aspirations of the Auckland Plan. And that's where we get to accommodate the growth through this quality compact approach of enduring quality, higher density living, and within that compact environmental footprint. And some of those, I'm sure some of you have looked at the various maps, and that just gives you a bit of an idea of one of the maps there. But the Unitary Plan provides density for developments over a number of zones. Residentially, these are the terrace housing and apartment zone. They're around up to 5 stories, so we're talking medium density. We're not talking, high rises here. This is where most of the growth in Auckland will occur. There's the mixed housing urban zone, that's up to about 3 stories. And we've rezoned a substantial amount of land for these 2 particular zones, plus the mixed housing suburban as well. So the THAB zone was principally applied around metro town centres, town centres, and then some major transit points. And so it has good access to public transit, real frequent public transport, rapid and frequent public transit, and other good social and public infrastructure. Not forgetting those, because that's what knits your community together. That's what holds your community. And then the mixed housing urban zone was primarily around the other centres. So town centres, local centres, and a little bit around neighbourhood centres, but not so much. Good walkability is important, and that is all part of the transport orientation. More importantly, the provisions of these zones now exclude any restriction on density, and that is a big change on the old planning documents of the legacy councils. So what that does in lifting the density tourniquet, what that says is it's all about the standards of the bulk and location of buildings. That really becomes really important, and that's where your skills as architects, urban designers and landscape architects come to the fore. So all of that has enabled more site-specific solutions and additional density through the Unitary Plan. So really the invitation in that area of the plan is to get creative. There is great opportunity to be creative as an architect, as a designer, urban designer, using those no density provisions and the requirement to let your skills sing. But we've also got to look out, to the edges. This is where I get slightly uncomfortable, but I have to present you with this information. I'm much more in the camp of density in the footprint that we're currently occupying inefficiently, rather than going quickly to the edges, to the quick buck real estate, which a particular minister espouses. We have some contests in our discussions on that one, but that is a very costly area, and I might come on to that later on. It is a very costly area to develop. So we have a focus through the Auckland Plan on both greenfield and brownfield. We need to address that in all our planning documents. But most growth absolutely is in the brownfield area. But the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy is a document that we have that's confirmed just in 2017, which identifies the land beyond the rural-urban boundary that in a sequenced way, once triggers are pulled, we can bring it in to be urbanised. But we'll have a monitoring strategy. It's just not anything can come at any time. It's a structured, sequenced release of land to accommodate another 67,000 jobs and around about 138,000 people dwellings. But look, there's been a lot of discussion about greenfields versus brownfields and extending or removing the rural-urban boundary, as I was just alluding to. This boundary is not a hard boundary. The old one, you've heard of the former boundary, the MUL, the Metropolitan Urban Limit. That was much more of a hard boundary. This is a soft boundary. So it does surprise me when I hear some of the parliamentarians talking about getting rid of this barrier. It is not a barrier. It's a soft and necessary boundary. And And I've talked to you about the split. We probably, when we did the Auckland Plan first time, we anticipated maybe about 30 or 40% of future development being in the green fields. The market is indicating at the moment that it could end up at quite a bit less than that, as it finds it's attractive to be closer to places of learning and earning. Some of the recent greenfield numbers that we're looking at in terms of just enabling it with infrastructure add up to around about $140,000 per dwelling unit. So before you get anything out of the ground, you're going to have to pay a developer, one of your clients, is going to have to hand over $140,000 just to enable the infrastructure to be put in place. So the core infrastructure for that 138,000 new dwellings is alone. This is not for the brownfields area, this is just the edges, the future urban land supply area. It was estimated a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, at $20 billion. So do some divisions on that and you'll see what the cost, the true cost of growing out at the edges is. Now I saw, I think it was the ACT leader comment recently about the housing crisis, and he referred to it being caused by artificially constrained land that was boosting prices, and that just flooding the market with land would lower costs. All around the world, they've canvassed all these problems, and there's no evidence of that. And going forward, what I'm saying to ministers, Minister Twyford, don't have much to do with David Parker, but Minister Twyford, he's a significant player in this, is that this needs to be an evidence-based approach. If the government wants to crash the rural-urban boundary, it needs to show us the evidence. As it's asking us to show evidence for projects like the CRL or light rail or whatever infrastructure that we might be working on with them. So it is a case of the good quality and medium density development being achieved, in my view, in the footprint that we're already connected to and that we could connect to better. The endless car-dependent commutes to those far-flung places in a supposedly affordable home come with a massive mortgage, and I know for a fact they come with an eternal motoring mortgage that you'll be paying forever. So cheap house day one, 30-year mortgage, driving your car, back to your friends, back to education, back to learning, because they are disconnected communities. And it is really hard to enliven a community in greenfields areas that you feel anchored and contained with for the first 5 years. Show me a greenfields development that within 5 years you feel a sense that you can belong there, that you don't need to move great distances. Probably the most recent example would be Hobsonville Land Company's Hobsonville. It took probably at least 8 years before there was a sort of sense of a bound community, and there was a community that, a place that it would hold you on the weekends, and you didn't need to run away from it. We've had some successes in competing for the compact urban model. Earlier this year we had a big win. I've been involved with this for, I think, as long as I've been a politician, since probably 2004, 2005, and it predates me, fighting with Todd and predecessors up there in Long Bay. But this proposal would have allowed for 1,900 dwellings. But we always argued that preserving the Long Bay Okura Marine Reserve for future generations was more important, and we've been proved right by the courts a number of times. Hopefully this is the last time. And we're going to have to defend that rural-urban boundary if we're going to make this a great place for us and all the generations that are yet to come. It's these places, they are the green lungs for the sea. It's this and others that provide the productive lands that sustain us. We've chewed up a third of the Pukekohe Hill. Beautiful elite soils, soils that you can grow 2 crops a year on, and we've eaten it up with housing on a third of it. I mean, that's just a sacrilege. People, you know, politicians like their memorials when they get things right, there's some politicians that need to have their name attached to the atrocious decisions as well. And I don't mind if mine is as well. I'm only interested in getting it right, of course, but I don't want my name on it. So that has been a good win. We've got some others that we're looking at as well. Crater Hill decision, you might be familiar with that. A magnificent environment. If you've ever got into Crater Hill and walked around, wow, it's a stunner. And anybody who puts an argument that you would want to chew that up for housing.
Where's Crater Hill?
Crater Hill is east of the airport and west of the motorway. If you know there is a cemetery down there, Monacau Cemetery, it's north of that. It's a hard to get to area. If you're coming into Auckland and by aircraft, next time you're coming out of Wellington, look out to your right side as you go across the motorway. And there's some wetlands there and crater, water-filled crater. It's a magnificent landscape. But I wanted to talk to you about some of the learnings that we've had out of our urban design panel. So I've been a real big fan of urban design panels. I've spoken to a lot of you. Many of you will have appeared in front of the urban design panel. It's something that I brought in when I was a North Shore councillor, working with the Ministry for the Environment, signing all the cities up to the urban design protocol. Started in Auckland, but we started using it, developed our own small one for some projects. The outcomes of this have been phenomenal. And there's been a real willingness from your profession to recognise this panel and a willingness to be in front of it with your projects. It's not mandatory, but it's hopefully part of the development process for you. And it's mandated to provide a truly independent design review of primarily the larger and more complex projects at this time, but as we increase the budget, and I'm ambitious to increase the budget for this so that we can drop down into some smaller projects. And it typically reviews developments of 20 units plus, but we're now getting it to review public space proposals as well, and I understand that the Aotea precinct area will be going in front of the urban design panel very shortly. So there are 7 key lessons that we've learnt out of this after numerous discussions with developers and panel members, and I want to go through some of those lessons and the issues and challenges that have been flushed out. First up, go for excellence. Hire yourself a designer for a start, and that's what we're telling people. That's what I'm often telling people when people come to me with, an idea to work on a project, is get your design team together. And that's not just your architect, it's your urban designer, your landscape architect, a decent planner to guide you through the myriad of documents. And it's amazing still in Auckland. I know the number of projects that are actually engaging your professions is increasing, but there are a lot of projects that, it is really down to drafting skills and a bit of CAD to get an application in. So it's a challenge for your profession to elevate the profession and actually sell it more and get everybody engaging with your skills. And also we're really keen at Auckland Council to collaborate with you. So we've got the pre-lodgement sessions available to work things out before the account starts rallying up the numbers. The second big lesson out of the urban design panel and through developers is get your context right, understand your context, engage with your context. Good design, as you well know, and I'm probably preaching to what you already know here, but it's got to be, have that empathetic relationship with its immediate and near context. And what you're working on as a response should always be as a result of that. For me, that's sort of just 101 in getting density right. engaging with neighbouring developments, with neighbouring communities, engaging with heritage if it's present, engaging with the natural and with the existing built to lead an outcome that is going to be a lot stronger. And being from the North Shore, I'm very, very aware of the historic context of Devonport, of Birkenhead, and I've seen a lot of mimicking. If you look at the wonderful Athfield Devonport Library, it doesn't try to mimic at all. It doesn't try to pretend that there's Edwardian, Victorian stuff across the road. It's honest to that, but it's got references to that, but it doesn't try to mimic it. And it's a 21st century building. It's a fantastic building. It was a real contest to get it there because you had a community that thought it needed to have a pointy roof. But it's there, and people have really fallen in love with it. It's a fantastic building, and we thank Athfields for that. The public, I also wanted to just mention actually another example, Northcote. I'm not sure whether there's anybody from Isthmus here. Isthmus have been doing some great work at Northcote. Northcote is one of our Panuku unlock places. Council owns a lot of Northcote Centre. This is Northcote Centre. The Crown owns a lot of the land around under Housing New Zealand. When you've got two significant landowners, you've got an opportunity to do something. And so we're in the throes of a master plan for the Northcote Town Centre, and we've taken it to the point where we're buying out just every property there to get a master plan that's not impeded by not having control of everything. And up there, you've got this wonderful, rich diversity of people. Strong Filipino, Chinese, Korean community underpinning it, and they've been amazing contributors. And I guess that's where I emphasise that it's not just about place making, it's also about place keeping, recognising that there are just about always valuable things to keep and to build on rather than make over the top. And I have seen that quite a lot in Auckland, where you hear this term place making, and it's like nothing of value that's already there is worth acknowledgement. So I'm quite keen in seeing that we do recognise the value of what's there, recognising that and building upon it. And that's what we are doing in Northcote. You'll see more of that to come. Third lesson is get your sites sorted. Open space, pedestrian movements, parking. I've got parking in brackets. That's a little bit about me again. Locate your blocks, your circulation, your open spaces, parking in brackets concurrently. Don't do them separately. They don't belong in their own little silos. You've got to do it in an integrated way. So there are many considerations and demands on your limited space, your canvas, but the key elements are going to be those buildings, vehicle entrances, the parking possibly, open space, pedestrian movement networks, all of that. But where one dominates the other, e.g. Auckland, the parking is dominated for decades, you get some pretty perverse outcomes. So get the balance right there in your design process, and you'll get a good outcome. Making parking disappear, one of my favourite lessons out of the urban design panel. One of the great achievements of the Unitary Plan is that less off-street parking is now required, and in some instances no off-street parking. And we worked really hard to get that. That was one of my personal pushes. There are lots of things you focus on when you're building the Unitary Plan, but again, lessons from big international cities is we needed to really work hard on this. We got pushed back very strongly by the development community. The development community is now going, wow, I'm glad you got it right and we got it wrong, because we are now starting to achieve what the market wants, which is not necessarily having to pay an extra $125,000 on top of the dwelling price for a car park, because they are in proximity to rapid transit, frequent transit, getting them to their earning and learning opportunities. Car parking spaces, if they have to be provided, let's integrate it. Let's not have it out front showing itself to the street. The car park should not be the showpiece to the street. Let that be your building that you're creating, the spaces that you're creating. Prioritising real estate for car parking is medium density done wrong, in my view. So we're seeing a whole new contest for that limited amount of space for cars is being repurposed, and we'll be seeing a lot more of that in our public areas as well. In the 1950s, we mortgaged out our streets to motor vehicles, and I think it's time to call that mortgage in. Streets make up about 25-30% of urban Auckland, and that road space is beckoning us, particularly in city centre areas, major centres. It is that road space that is the new open space where you can't create new parks. You actually have to take back what you loaned to the motor vehicle 60 years ago. Zoning in the Unitary Plan allows for a lot more density, as you know, around our transport hubs through the removal of those density provisions, increased height limits, gone over that, and we're rapidly building a 21st century worthy transit system, and we're amping that up now with regional fuel tax, better government funding, ATAP, and good plans. $28 billion package of investment over coming years on things like City to Mangere light rail, more to come on that, Eastern Busway, it's all underway now. Additional trains coming in 2 years, I think it is, no, 1.5 years. Bus priority rollouts delivering massive dividends. Northern Express just got the numbers through March 19 on March 18. The Northern Express is up 39%. Frequent bus, March on March, up 31%. Pukekohe Rail, up 19%. People are flocking to public transport. Yes, they did it back in the 50s, different place then, but it is there's an enormous appetite for public transport right now. And we've got to wrap around that all the great walking and cycling opportunities. We're also seeing the bike boom underway, well underway. It's been underway for probably about 3 years now. And then a subset of that is the e-bike revolution. E-bikes are outselling e-cars in New Zealand by about 10 to 1. No media on that. You'll see lots of media about the number of EVs cars are sold, but you won't see much about the e-bike revolution. So we've seen big increases in the city centre. We've seen a really quick shift, and maybe a lot of this is linked to the constriction of access. But we're seeing a shift in about 3 or 4 months from 50% driving into the city centre. It's now down to 43% at the end of March. And active modes are up, they've nudged up to about 9%. So some good trends happening there. And then there's micro-mobility. And this is all important about medium density being done well. And it's relevant. There is a runaway success of the e-scooters. And today we've just announced three companies all up, in addition to Lime and Wave. A company out of Wellington, Flamingo, will also be coming to Auckland, and we'll have about, I think it's about 1,800 scooters on the market in city centre, and there's tier 2 and tier 3 to make sure that we get a read of how people in Manukau or Henderson or Albany enjoy scooters, not just the urban population close to the city centre. So medium density needs to reflect all those changes as well. Now think of it, how many of us would have anticipated the arrival and enormous success of e-scooters 18 months ago? Probably none of us would have anticipated that. You see people on electric longboards now. There's a whole lot of things coming down. Lime are experimenting with, I think they're called unipods. No, that can't be unipod because it's a two-seater travelling device. There are going to be devices and technology which is going to disrupt us You can probably anticipate, look at how e-scooters has disrupted us and just multiply that by 10 over the next few years. It's going to change very, very rapidly. And somebody asked me last night, oh yeah, but how many people are giving up their cars to come to e-scooters? Well, Lime's information, their surveys indicate that some 22% of their users are giving up on a motor vehicle to take a scooter, which is a good outcome. Let's go to focusing on the shared spaces, giving attention to activation and the attractiveness of those spaces is important. Providing generous planting. We need to green the city up pretty quickly with climate change coming at us or with us. You know, adaptable seating in these public spaces. You know, getting the soft and the hard mix right. Avoiding filling up public spaces. We've been pretty good at that in the past. Just because it's open, suddenly, sometimes landscape architects, the lesser ones, Matthew, are very quick to see that the space is open, so therefore it needs to be filled. I don't get that. We need to make sure that these spaces, particularly in the city centre, can be flexible, that they can be intimate, they can be places where people congregate, where they linger, where they have their lunch and socialise, and then they come alive at night. You know, a place for protest, all of that. That's how we need to see our public spaces, rather than being, you know, the perfect landscape architecture solution for maybe one purpose. They've got to provide a lot more than that. Locating communal public spaces, if you're working on multi-unit developments, you know, looking at the movement networks that are around that and within that, the paths and laneways, and just valuing all of that when you're working things up, making them really relevant and desirable. The communal is open spaces. They all need their sunlight, they need their daylight. They also need their shade though. Got to be wary of designing a space in the winter that doesn't work in the summer. You'll be getting projects come your way at the moment. Be an architect, not for the season that you're designing it in. Be an architect for all the 4 seasons and the change in the climate to come. Making sure that those shared spaces overlook the housing rather than being entirely entombed and not relating. You know, allowing those dwellings to observe the public spaces, to participate in the public spaces from afar, giving them life without being that so overt. You know, bringing public cooking to public spaces. We're looking at a great public square in Takapuna at the moment. One of the things I've asked for is to pre-wire it, have electricity points and water points where you can take water for markets. You can maybe take a gas, take gas off for cooking, and that might be for markets or it might be an event. Look, we see these in other cities. There's no reason why we can't do it here. Another lesson is about, you know, shaping a great city. You guys, you have an important role here, as you well know, in delivering not just buildings but healthy streets and neighbourhoods. I've emphasised the need to, you know, break down the mass and break down those overly large apartment blocks into, you know, appropriately human scale buildings, in an endeavour to create those livable environments that feel that a human being belongs there. And I do take my hat off to all those that have been involved with the Wynyard Quarter. I know a number of you have been involved with the Wynyard Quarter, but the Wynyard Quarter is just unfolding beautifully. There's a real sense of delight down there now. And the market is responding. The market wants, you know, people want to be there. Admittedly, it's pretty highly priced and it lacks the affordable component, but there are still some good lessons to be had from the Wynyard Quarter. The soft infrastructure is critically important as well. I've covered that. You know, we need to allow nature to go to work in our cities like never before. And I talk about, some of you talk about also the sponge city. We've been a city where it's disposed of its water, it's jettisoned its water into streams, drains, waterways and out to sea. In the future we're going to have to receive and hold that water, make use of it, celebrate it, and have that water contribute to the greening of the city as well. And you know, get those aquifers recharged, keep it with us rather than treating it as something that is a waste product. That's the stormwater I'm talking about. And a good example of that is up in Wairau in my patch. We did this about 4 years ago, and I can't remember who the landscape architect was. I should, sorry. This has been hugely successful. This is at the top of the Wairau catchment, and that whole going down that catchment, it is a concrete culvert all the way, pretty much all the way to the sea. And in time, we'll have to remove all of that concrete. And we will. It'll be a long job, but already communities are crying out for that and a bit more, starting at the Milford end and working up. So we're working from both ends at the moment. This is a beautiful project. You're seeing fish life return, you're seeing the eels travel from the sea, invertebrate life appear, wading birds turn up. This is really in a light industrial area, if you know it, right beside the motorway.
I think it's Boffers.
Boffers? I think you're right, yeah. I'll go back to climate change though, and you'll see us draw a big focus on climate change in about a month at our Environment and Community Committee. Penny Hulse has been doing a lot of work on this, and there is a question at the moment whether we actually declare for this city a climate emergency. I'm having that discussion with Penny and with the Mayor about not just having a climate action plan, but actually recognising that we do actually have a climate emergency. And this is, of course, being discussed in many cities at the moment. Such is the enormity and immediacy of this challenge. There's no escaping it. There's nowhere to go. There's no hideaways that you can conjure up to escape this one. So we are going to have to ensure that we address this like it is an emergency. And look, probably last lesson is ultimately you're contributing to all the people of the city in what you're creating, and it's all about the quality of life holistically. It is not just about creating them homes or places to work or the public spaces they might be congregating. It's all about delivering as I term, an enduring quality of life. Wherever we go in our city, we should be experiencing great places, great buildings, buildings that we do celebrate, that we have a recognition of as being that sings to me, that contributes to me, that helps me stay in this place, that makes me smile. I think I've spoken a lot about daylight, light. I always remember the Christopher Alexander book when I briefed an architect. I briefed Architectus on a project a few years ago, and it took my wife and I a long time to write the brief. I think it was about a 10, 12-page brief. But one of the books that I loved was Christopher Alexander's Pattern Language, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. But I always remember Christopher Alexander talking about light from two sides, and I've never forgotten that. And I do see a number of apartments going through the application process today that are probably a bit too deep and lacking that ability to have light penetrate them. There's nothing like light to wake you up, not just in the morning but throughout the day. Being able to be in proximity to natural light is just a gift. So we need to get that right and reflect on Christopher Alexander. Getting your stud heights right, 2.7 minimums and above. Under that, it's a cocoon, and it's not pleasant to be in. So if your client is insistent on, lowering those stat heights, challenge them. And the easy flow between rooms, the connectivity between living rooms and kitchen, that's the place of dwellings where the people are magnetised to. And then there's those connections to your living spaces, ultimately your outdoor room spaces, and beyond your outdoor rooms, your outdoor spaces into the street space. So ensuring that good quality design as we intensify is absolutely paramount. You're all making a massive difference to the Aucklanders that you're working for and all the Aucklanders that will follow on. And let's ensure that what we are doing in terms of medium density, doing it well, is something that we can all sit back and look back on in our careers 20 years hence, 30 years hence, and still be proud of the projects that you're working on. I'm sure there'll be some lessons learned, but hopefully we can all sit back 20, 30 years hence and go, yeah, that added, that didn't take away. So I think I might just wrap it there. There isn't a tread water approach in Auckland's future. We have a lot to do and we've got to do it fast. The challenges I've outlined affect us all. It's not council does this and you do that. We need to be in this together, and we need to tackle this avalanche of challenges that are at us head on in quite different ways to how we've done it before. So I wish you well, and kia ora mai from me. Thank you.
You'll take questions?
Absolutely, yes.
So, some questions for Councillor Darby. One here.
You're talking about climate change and treating that as an emergency. What's the single greatest threat/challenge that you think that we face because of climate change?
So we know that a city, the best thing a city can do to play its part in combating the onslaught of climate change, trying to slow it up, is to address how that city moves. There's lots of evidence on this. So transportation is where you need to look first and basically revolutionise how you move around the city. So moving around by private motor vehicle with an occupancy in the AM and PM peak, as we currently do, of 1.1, so 75% of a private motor vehicle in the AM peak is empty. So we've got to draw a focus faster than we are now. So we've got to accelerate the shift in mode from single occupant vehicles, private transport, to rapid transit, to frequent transit, to active transport. Numbers are good, but we are going to have to invest even more significantly and bring more out of the toolbox. I don't know what it's going to be. We are going to have to find the spend, but if we as a city, like all other big cities, are going to tackle climate change, you have to address transport. There's no way around it. We won't be driving as we are today in 5 years, not remotely, and it'll look very different in 10 years.
Question at the back there.
Hi, Chris, and as a follow-on to that, has the council got funds maybe through the transport allocated to closing all level crossings across the railway network to improve the efficiency of the railway system?
Yeah, there is. Good to see you. There are some funds, not enough. So we've got level crossings and we've got fatalities on level crossings. So we've got a good big focus on road safety. That is a road. It's a railroad. It's an intersection of railroad and road. We've got far too many serious injuries and fatalities on those crossings. We've got some challenges out west, as you well know. There is budget in Kiwi Rail as well, but there is not enough budget to accelerate that rail crossing program. I'll let you, Bill.
So here and then there and then
I'm completely on board with all you're saying, and using public transport for my earning and learning. But how do I get to surf? I try and find out how to get on public transport to go surfing, and I can't get there. And I imagine if I borrow a car for the day, they're not going to be happy with the very sandy, salty seats from my surfboard being sort of across them. So I was wondering if there are going to be funds going into the transport network or other thinking about getting to the play spaces as well. Otherwise, I will really want to hold on to my car and get a leaf.
Did surf and take a photo the other day?
It's really hard to get to Takapuna from Grey Lynn. It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It is.
So,
In the weekend. It sounds trivial, but I think it's one of the things that might hold people back from having go with their cars.
What cars?
yeah. So look, shared cars, City Hop. Somebody mentioned City Hop.
There is not a City Hop anywhere near I live. I've got to take all my equipment, my 2 kids, down to the central city to get a City Hop, and get them in the City Hop, go to the beach, come back with a very messy car, get out of it and try and get on the bus with my surfboard and my 2 children and go back home. And I just don't know that that is good enough.
Okay, so look, there are lots of examples where you can't. I mean, people used to say, "Oh, forget about your cycling pilgrimage, Chris. I can't go to the supermarket on the cycle." Well, that's a fallacy now, isn't it? There's plenty of people going to the supermarket on their cycle. You just buy differently. But look, there are going to be lots of categories where the transport plan doesn't cover everybody. We're trying to cover most people, and it's a challenge. But look, I can tell you now, there won't be a 15-minute service to the 3-metre swell at Muriwai. There won't be a bus going to, take surfers to Muriwai or Pakari. We just can't do that. But there will be other solutions, and there probably are solutions. I haven't had to explore those, but someone mentioned City Hop. Go and ask someone for a car. Now, when I get caught out, on the weekend I got caught out on something, I just asked a friend for a vehicle.
But if my friend doesn't have a car either.
Okay. Now, a number of us have got very individual issues that we could bail up the councillor about. I think
doesn't that go to the heart of the question here, though?
No, sorry.
But doesn't that last question go to the heart of the issue of approaching these problems with imagination? You're quite right, Chris. Not everybody's solution will be met, but making it exciting that there is a bus to Piha on the weekends for surfers, which would be incredibly popular, just in the centre. Making that a thing, that's the kind of thinking that Auckland Transport could do, and it doesn't do you enough of.
Yep, I recognise that. Well, I guess what I am saying there, Simon, is we won't be providing a bus to Muriwai just to go to the surf break. Yeah, well, obviously he knows where there's a better break.
There's no room for cars.
Yeah. I take your point, though. Imagination.
Hi there. There's a lot of building that needs to be done, whether it be to house people or because of the changing nature of how we build our cities so that people are on transit routes. More building and denser building usually means more concrete and more steel, which runs directly opposed to our aims of trying to reduce our emissions. And construction creates an enormous percentage of the CO2 emissions and waste as well. As we tear down the Cody and remove single-storey dwellings in order to put up very useful multi-unit, multi-storey dwellings. How is the council going to ensure that we don't build our way into guaranteeing offensive levels of climate change?
Yeah. So this is something we canvassed indirectly at the Mayoral Housing Task Force. Christina was on the Mayoral Housing Task Force, and we looked at the need for innovation in building technology. It's a big focus area. NZIA are just about to report to the Mayoral Housing Task Force. It was their body of work to work on. They've been working on it for a long time. It's recognised. We've got people from Fletcher Building on that urban design panel, from other big developers. They all recognise that they cannot build the way they're building into the future. We've got a resource of timber in this country. You can vertically stack in timber construction now. And I've seen examples of up to, I think it's 9 stories?
In other countries it's more.
Is it even more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cross-laminated timber is another thing.
And looking at your material choices is something that not just the industry needs to examine, but look, you're prescribing as well. You're specifying. As architects, you're specifying. So you're in charge here. If you know that, then for you to go back to your client and say, hey, look, you don't need to do it this concrete. This concrete comes from Portland, it comes from the West Coast, it comes through, energy sapping batching plants. I've got this timber solution for you. And so, hey, in some ways, it's in your court, you're the specifiers.
How
But-
is it incentivised that by changing tweaking the
Building code. Yeah, so the code?
Yeah, we've got code and
Act.
costs in terms of applications and
Yeah.
Like hustling it for crossland.
For crosslands, yeah. So there is some work being done on this by NZIA, and I think it's due at the Mayoral Housing Task Force next month. How far they've got, I don't know.
The embodied energy in a building, they put it up from 5% to 20% of our carbon emissions as a country. And so timber is definitely the way forward for it. But I put it to you that planning is probably much more responsible and will be much more responsible than transport in cities for carbon emissions. Most of our running costs of our building are electric anyway, which is mainly sustainable in this country. And transport is very soon going to be electric as well. So it's the embodied energy and rebuilding our buildings every time a planner rezones it that actually will be creating a lot of carbon in this town.
Yep.
So it's getting buildings right on a 200-year or 100-year basis instead of the present 25 to 50-year basis.
Yep, agree.
Question.
I just wanted to ask which politician had allowed Code Hill to be built up.
Look, it was back in the Franklin District days. Just about all of that was permitted under the Franklin District Council before the new structure came in. I don't know the names. I probably wouldn't nutter them anyway. We've had to move on. It's a crying shame when you are in Pookie.
So we've got 2 more questions here and then one there, and then we might have to wrap it up. So,
short and sweet. If Auckland has to think 30 years ahead and transport is the main issue, where's their stance on the airport railway?
What's my stance on?
Where's Auckland
Yeah.
Council's stance on the
On the light rail as proposed city centre to Māngere to the airport? Anything. Okay, look, that project, what you have heard as the light rail project, city centre, through Mount Roskill, Dominion Road, Onehunga, Māngere Airport, is the government's project, but they've really picked up a project that we've been working on for a while, and thankfully they're going to bear the cost of it. So it's in a business case stage, and broadly speaking, that business case means that they're talking to a couple of major funders. But that is only about, I think it's only 5 or 7, 8% max of those that are boarding in the city centre are going to be boarding an aircraft. We often think about this as the great connection from city centre to the airports. Total fallacy. The whole idea of that light rail project is to connect the tens of thousands of people that are going to be living in the isthmus. So the isthmus, all that Mount Roskill area, and parts of Māngere are quite disconnected from good transit.
You were talking about Auckland only contributing 37% to the country's GDP. Surely the connection between the Auckland airport and the Auckland business district is a crucial part of that.
Yeah, it is. And the second fastest growing economic zone in Auckland is actually the airport economic zone, and that extends quite a way to the north as well. But the first win in terms of connection, we've got a design for a new Pūnui station. If you've been through Pūnui, it's pretty much, I'm not going to get off there. So that will be major interchange from the south, from the Waikato, but primarily from the north, and then you'll transfer there to a rapid bus system on priority access, priority lanes to the airport. And so that will just be moving between the airport, Puhinui and back again, and then in time it'll be airport, Puhinui, Manukau and back, and then further afield it'll be punching through Tiarangi Drive and out towards Botany. These are initially buses, yeah. So when I'm going to the airport now, I invariably, I'm in Devonport, I'm a ferry, I don't do the Sky Bus, I transfer to the rail, get off at Papatoetoe, never look at the timetable because I know there's a bus every 15 minutes at Papatoetoe, and it's a pretty quick way to the airport, and it's a damn integrated fare, and it's a damn sight cheaper than the Sky Bus. But we need to promote that. I just don't know why that's not promoted as by Auckland Transport as a really easy route. But that's just for my catchment. You know, you've got to think of others.
I was just wondering, with your development of the Auckland Unitary Plan and the 2050 plan, what cities, if any, outside of New Zealand have you guys looked to for inspiration or to develop this plan?
Look, our technical staff, we don't send them on overseas junkets. You don't need to do that, and we get scolded for that. But look, I'm not the one that's contributing all the technical data, etc. But our staff are very familiar, and I'm familiar with some really successful cities. And one of my favourite cities is Copenhagen. I love Copenhagen. I love Stockholm, Malmo. For me, it's a lot of those cities. And in some ways, we're quite culturally similar as well. They don't have this wonderful Auckland diversity that we've got, maybe Stockholm. But look, we've looked where cities have made mistakes as well. Look, you can go to Vancouver, great city, get the rail and go out about 15 minutes, and I don't think it's a great city. But get the rail and go out in Auckland, and you're not necessarily a great city either. I think, you've got to be careful when you look at overseas examples, reading them from the core. You've really got to read the whole city, and it embarrasses me sometimes when I see Auckland rise up in these Mercer rankings and Economist rankings as the world's most livable city, etc. I'd really like to ask some of these people that are writing these stories how long they were in the hotel for. I don't get a sense that they've actually explored Auckland. They haven't gone surfing, and they haven't gone to Otara, and they haven't seen Māngere, and they haven't seen the pockets on the North Shore. I'm really suspicious of those rankings. Don't put a lot of weight on them, to be honest. But in terms of cities, yep, we can learn from a lot, but then you have to create in this context. And we've got to understand, the Tamaki Makaurau context as well, because that is our total differentiator.
Now we had, I said there was it you? Yeah. And then we'll let Andrew have a go. And one last very much the last question here, okay? So, because last week I had, with Michael on the phone, we got trapped in a lift for half an hour. And I don't want that to happen again today.
Okay.
So, who was it? Yeah.
I just want to understand how you feel the relationship between local councillors and government. Do you feel they're listening to you? And likewise, the other way. Is there actually a good relationship there, or are they literally in an ivory tower?
Currently, there is. This afternoon we met with Minister Phil Twyford on some transport issues and some housing issues down in the south. We would see Minister Phil probably every 2 weeks, like he's actually meeting with us. I recently wrote a letter on universal design, interest to all of you. We lost the universal design provisions in the Unitary Plan through the So we're going to go back and have another look. Wrote a letter to, I think it was Minister Mahuta. Got a reply from 3 ministers, all wanting to come and talk to us about universal design. So we had Minister Mahuta, Minister Salisa and Minister Twyford at that meeting. So this is working on things that we think are important, universal design and access. We're getting real big uptake. We don't have a shortage of ministers wanting to come and talk to us. I'm probably keen that there is, some of you might be familiar with a PwC report about cities recently. I've always thought there needs to be a Minister of Cities because I've been critical of governments, former Labour, last National, not understanding cities. Cities are the future of nations, and they've been pretty shy on that. But look, I can say look, and this is not just some political response or smart aleck stuff. The relationship with this current government is pretty damn good. AC36, David Parker was phenomenal.
And last question.
If you had, we'll call it $5 billion, what would you personally spend as your priorities for the infrastructure? Call it 10.
5, 10.
In order.
Oh, look, I'm probably not, this is probably not going to come out in any rational way, but we need to get the spine of rapid transit finished. The spine of rapid transit, so we need to do that light rail, X billion. We need to electrify to Pukekohe. We need to go west with light rail. We need to punch out of the light rail that lands in the city centre under the harbour and go north. And then you've got your spine. And then in time you'll build your laterals off that with at-grade light rail connections. But probably the thing that comes to mind for me is I'm quite concerned about our centres and the health of our centres and the onslaught of online. If you are familiar with what's happened in the UK, there are centres that have imploded. They imploded when all the steel industries closed down, the car manufacturing plants closed down, and they resuscitated themselves, and they're collapsing again. And we're exposed to Trade Me and a bit of Amazon, and Amazon are building a big warehouse over in Australia, so we'll see a bit more. But we don't have JD.com, we don't have Alibaba, and the half dozen others that the European market has access to. So, answer, I think we need to think about what our future centres are. I'm seeing really weak centres, and the future is not in traditional retail, it's going to be a different retail, it's going to be less retail, and the biggest growth at the moment in terms of retail is food and beverage. It's growing about 16% per annum. That's about people gathering, congregating, exchanging. There's opportunities there. I have thought, I don't want to give away too much about election policies, Mr. Wilson, but until the CRL decision, I would be angling for probably $500 million in the next 8 years to go into centres. And that alone wouldn't go very far. You probably need $1 billion. We are definitely going to have to think about our centres.
Thanks. In terms of growth, managing growth, do you think there's a role for council to be working with business and government to encourage growth in the regions as opposed to growth in Auckland? Could you take the edge off Auckland's growth by encouraging growth in other cities? We're a very unbalanced country in terms of distribution.
Yeah, and look, that sort of cohesive plan, you'd expect that to be with the government, but there's never really been an invitation to understand when Auckland grows and prices explode here, Whangarei grows and Tauranga grows and Hamilton grows and everything in between grows. But it's very organic at the moment. I don't get a sense that there's anybody in Wellington thinking about that. We struggle to just keep up with Auckland. And so it's a little bit beyond our remit, but we could certainly participate in that because we know where the pressures are, and we don't have all the answers here. I cry for Whangarei, for example. I know Whangarei pretty well, and it's just been abandoned for such a long time. You know, National Party take the vote for granted and then walk away and don't invest there. The current guy is investing, but this is a, you know, very similar stories all around New Zealand. There are many towns that have imploded because all the focus has been on the big one. That's why I say, you know, Auckland has to contribute to the nation.
Is an opportunity.
Yeah, we'll see how that shakes out. I'm very open. If it's evidence-based and if it says go there or part of it goes there, I'm with that. I'd probably like to put the Navy into play as well. I think there could be some synergies if you put the Navy into play. At the moment, I think that's my next letter to Ron Mark is talk to Shane about putting the Navy into play.
I'd like to add to that one actually. Is it possible to have a dialogue with the Navy about carpooling their people down Lake Road?
I've had that dialogue. Yeah, just briefly, because we need to wrap, but Navy have changed their remuneration. They don't provide housing anymore like they used to at a discounted rate, and so all that housing on the Devonport Peninsula, I'm very familiar with it, has been transferred through treaty settlement, and most of the Navy ratings, if you're a new rating, you get a place on North Yard for 6 weeks or so, and then you have to find your own. It's changed dramatically. We supposedly have got a travel plan with Navy. They've done some things, but we really need to wake them up on how they move their people to and from. But look, they're not, that's the Navy, that's an anchor. The balance, all of us who live on the peninsula need to change our travel patterns as well.
As Councillor Darby mentioned, it's local government election year this year.
Oh, I won't go there.
So you will get more opportunities to meet him and discuss various issues with him. Next week, we'll be talking about the Housing and Urban Design Authority. I certainly hope, because that will be a powerful body, I certainly hope that body follows a lot of the guidelines and policy that's been established at the moment, rather than going off and trying to get some quick and dirty runs on the board for various ministers. So that's next week. So please thank Councillor Darby.
Thank you.